The first thing Jamie noticed about the aquarium was the sound. Not the chatter of visitors or the hum of lights, but the constant, soft lapping of water. It echoed through the glass halls like a breath held underwater, calm and steady. He liked it. It made him feel small, but in a way that was grounding. He had only been working there for a week. His duties were simple: cleaning viewing panels, checking filtration units, feeding schedules. It was mostly quiet work which suited him. He had always preferred the company of animals to people, especially in spaces like this, where everything moved slowly and no one demanded too much. Victor was different. He was the senior aquarist, responsible for the exhibits and their delicate ecosystems. He rarely spoke unless necessary, and when he did, his voice was low and calm, like it had spent years learning not to echo too loudly in rooms filled with water. There was a steadiness to him, a precision in the way he moved, like he belonged to this place more than anyone. Jamie had only shared a few shifts with him, mostly in silence. But even in that silence, he had noticed things. The way Victor checked the coral tanks with the care of someone touching a fragile memory. The way his eyes softened when the sea turtles approached. The way he stood, never rushed, never unsure. On Friday night, the aquarium was set to close early for a systems update. A skeleton crew was scheduled to stay late, checking tanks and monitoring temperature readouts. Jamie was assigned the late shift for the first time. He didn't mind. He was curious to see what the building felt like after dark. By the time the last of the visitors trickled out, the lights dimmed into soft hues of blue and green, casting rippling patterns across the floors. The noise faded, replaced by the rhythmic hum of machines and the slow movement of water behind glass. The vast halls felt like a dream, half lost in light, half drowned in silence. Jamie found himself in the Pacific Reef exhibit, wiping down handrails and double-checking signage. The glow of jellyfish in the adjacent room bled faintly into the corridor, giving everything a surreal shimmer. He paused to watch the fish drifting through coral, their movement effortless. He hadn't heard Victor approach, but he felt his presence before he saw him, like the shift of current in a still pool. Turning, he saw him standing just a few feet away, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning a set of readings on the wall. They nodded at each other, a silent acknowledgement. No words, just mutual awareness. Victor stepped past him to check the reef filtration intake. Jamie watched from the corner of his eye as he moved, noting how his shadow curved along the tank glass, blending with the silhouettes of fish behind it. He wondered what Victor thought about when he was alone in this place, whether he heard the silence as music or as memory. The hours moved slowly, time measured in tasks and reflections. Jamie swept, sanitized, and checked supply closets. Occasionally, he and Victor would cross paths, briefly, wordlessly. Each time, something unspoken passed between them, a familiarity that didn't belong to such a short acquaintance. Near midnight, Jamie found himself in the jellyfish room. It was his favorite. The creatures floated like glowing veils, pulsing with light, suspended in eternal rhythm. He stood there longer than necessary, watching them drift. The water inside the tank moved with such grace that it made everything else feel loud and clumsy. Victor entered quietly, his footsteps absorbed by the padded floor. He stood a few feet away, arms crossed as he observed the display. Jamie didn't look at him, but he felt his presence as strongly as the glow of the tank. They stood in silence. Seconds stretched. Jamie shifted his weight, unsure why the air felt heavier, denser than before. The room was cool, but something inside him was warm, uncomfortably so. Victor's voice came at last, quiet and even. They move like they don't notice us watching. Jamie nodded, still not looking. He didn't know what to say, but the comment lingered. They don't need to, he said softly after a pause. There was no response, but somehow that felt like enough. They remained there for a while, shoulder to shoulder, never touching. The light from the tank painted their faces in soft blues and purples, the rhythm of the jellyfish echoing somewhere beneath their skin. Jamie didn't know what he was feeling. Not exactly, but he knew it was new, and he knew it had something to do with the man standing beside him. Eventually, Victor turned and left, his footsteps retreating into the shadows. Jamie stayed a few minutes longer, eyes following the slow dance inside the tank. He felt something settle in his chest. Not understanding, but curiosity. A quiet tug, like a tide pulling at his feet. And it didn't feel wrong, just inevitable. After that night, something changed between Jamie and Victor, though no one watching would have noticed. Their routines stayed the same. Morning checks, tank maintenance, supply counts. Their conversations remained sparse, transactional. But underneath the quiet, something subtle shifted, like a current flowing just beneath the surface. Jamie found himself paying closer attention. He memorized the sound of Victor's boots on the hallway tiles. He noticed how Victor's hands moved when adjusting coral structures, deliberate, steady, with the kind of care Jamie had only ever seen in people tending to something they truly loved. When they passed in the corridors, there was no lingering eye contact, no smiles. But each interaction felt charged with a quiet understanding, like they were reading from a page no one else could see. One afternoon, while restocking the feeding station, Jamie glanced through the office window and saw Victor seated at the far desk, head down, scribbling notes onto a tank report. His posture was composed, focused, but something in the way he tapped his pen against the paper suggested a weight that had nothing to do with work. Jamie lingered longer than he needed to. That evening, they were scheduled for another overnight shift together, routine maintenance that required 2 people on hand in case of system alerts. Jamie arrived early, not to impress, but because part of him felt restless. He wandered through the low-lit halls before starting his tasks, letting the soft reflections from the tanks wash over him. In the deep-sea exhibit, where the lights barely broke through the blackness of simulated ocean depths, Jamie paused. This room always quieted something in him. It reminded him of long train rides at night, or the feeling of being underwater with his ears full and the world muted. Victor entered a few minutes later, walking slowly, as if he, too, came here to breathe. They worked in silence, checking timers, adjusting panel settings, logging chemical readings. At one point, Victor passed Jamie a flashlight, their fingers brushing, barely, but enough for a flicker of awareness to ripple through Jamie's skin. Neither of them acknowledged it. They didn't have to. Later, they found themselves in the staff lounge during a short break. The room was quiet, lit by a single overhead bulb that cast a warm circle over the small table. Jamie sat with a bottle of water, elbows resting on the surface, hands folded. Victor stood by the window, looking out into the night beyond the parking lot. The silence was different here. Not heavy, not awkward, just full. Jamie wanted to ask something, anything, about the tanks, about his past, about what this strange, growing feeling meant. But the words tangled in his throat, and he feared breaking whatever fragile thing existed between them. Instead, Victor turned from the window and sat across from him. He said nothing, just looked at Jamie for a moment, steady, unreadable. Jamie met his gaze and didn't look away. Something passed between them. Not a question, not an answer, just a mutual recognition that they were both feeling something neither was ready to name. After the break, they returned to their rounds. The halls were nearly dark now, save for the soft glow from the larger exhibits. The air was cooler, the world outside wrapped in sleep. In the seagrass tunnel, where floor-to-ceiling glass created the illusion of walking beneath the ocean, they moved side by side. Above them, rays glided silently, their bodies casting shadows that danced across the walls. Jamie stopped without realizing it. Victor paused a step ahead, then turned. Jamie looked up at the creatures overhead, then back at Victor. The lighting painted them in blue and gold, like oil across water. His heart beat loudly in the stillness. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Victor didn't speak. He just waited. Jamie didn't know what to say. There was no right phrase, no elegant way to voice the pull he felt, the way his skin tingled in the older man's presence, the way the silence between them felt more intimate than touch. Instead, he offered the only thing he could in that moment, presence. He didn't move closer. He didn't speak. But he stood still, and he let himself be seen. Victor watched him for a long breath, then gave the smallest nod. almost imperceptible. It was enough. They walked on, footsteps light against the floor. The shift ended at 3 a.m. They left through the staff entrance, their shadows stretching ahead of them in the glow of the emergency lights. As Jamie reached his car, he glanced back. Victor stood by the door, one hand in his jacket pocket, watching. No wave, no bouvier, just that same steady gaze. Jamie drove home with the windows cracked, letting in the cool night air. The sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, a faint promise of morning. Inside him, something stirred like a tide turning. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew it wasn't going away. The aquarium during the day was alive. Children's laughter echoing off glass, the chatter of families, tour guides narrating stories of sea creatures with theatrical charm. But Jamie preferred the after hours. When the lights dimmed and the ocean's rhythm reclaimed the space, the exhibits transformed. Not into shows or attractions, but into worlds. Real, deep, and ancient. He was scheduled for another overnight shift with Victor, something he had started anticipating in a way that made him restless. That evening, the sky turned overcast, casting the city in shades of silver and shadow. Rain tapped gently against the skylights of the aquarium as Jamie arrived, damp from the walk from the train station. The building was already locked to the public. Inside, the world was quiet. Victor was in the maintenance room, checking system logs, surrounded by soft glows from wall panels and tank monitors. He looked up as Jamie entered, gave a slight nod, and returned to the screen. Jamie watched him for a moment before grabbing his own clipboard and beginning the routine checks. They moved through the halls in sync, a practiced rhythm forming between them. There was no need to assign tasks anymore. They each gravitated to different sections, unconsciously aligned. Jamie found himself in the moon jelly exhibit, wiping condensation from the inside of the glass. The room was nearly dark, lit only by the glow of the jellies, translucent bodies pulsing with soft light, suspended in endless motion. Their movements were mesmerizing. He often lost time here, eyes tracing their slow spirals, the gentle collapse and bloom of their forms. Victor appeared a few minutes later, quietly stepping in and standing near the opposite wall. He didn't say anything, just leaned back against the panel and looked at the display. The space between them filled with the gentle sound of water filters and low aquatic hums. The tank light cast moving shadows across their faces, shifting constantly like a tide. Jamie finished wiping the panel and took a seat on the low bench along the wall. His hands rested in his lap. He didn't look at Victor, but he could feel the man's presence pressing gently into the air between them. After a long stretch of silence, Victor moved to sit beside him, not close enough to touch, but near enough to feel. For a moment, neither said anything. Then, Victor exhaled, a slow, thoughtful breath. "I used to come here a lot," he said, voice low, "even on my days off. Back when I first started." Jamie glanced at him. The side of Victor's face was calm, unreadable in the shifting light. "It felt easier," Victor continued, "to be around something that didn't need me to explain anything." Jamie listened. His chest tightened, not from anxiety but recognition. He understood the pull of silence, of places where the world didn't ask for words. Victor's gaze remained fixed on the jellyfish. "I went through something a few years ago. Ended badly. I stopped coming here for a while after that." Jamie didn't respond. He didn't need to. His presence was the answer. Victor finally turned to look at him. His expression wasn't guarded, but there was a kind of softness like a door slightly open. "You remind me of that time," he said quietly. "Not because it was easy, but because I remember what it's like to want to disappear into something quieter." The words settled over Jamie like the hum of deep water. He didn't know what to say, or if anything needed to be said. Instead, he let the silence stretch again. A comfortable silence, one that wrapped around both of them like a current, not pulling them under, but carrying them together. Minutes passed. The jellyfish continued their endless motion, casting light that rippled across the floor. Jamie leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He didn't look at Victor, but he could feel his presence, steady and grounding. He wanted to ask more. about the past, about the kind of pain that made someone stop visiting a place they loved. But he held back, not out of fear, but respect. Some truths needed space. Eventually, Victor stood, his movements slow, thoughtful. Jamie rose, too, brushing off his sleeves. Neither of them spoke as they stepped back into the hall. The lights outside seemed dimmer now, the world narrower and more intimate. The rest of his shift passed in quiet efficiency. They worked side by side, exchanging only the occasional glance or nod. But something had changed. A layer peeled back. A wall thinned. When Jamie left that night, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened with reflection, streetlights bending across puddles like lines drawn in water. As he walked toward the train station, his thoughts were calm, but focused. He wasn't just drawn to Victor because of mystery or silence. He felt safe with him, seen, and in that stillness, something fragile but real had begun to take shape. He didn't know what came next, but for the first time, he wanted to find out. The rain returned 3 days later, harder this time, slamming against the skylights and casting ripples across the floor tiles as though the whole building had sunk beneath the sea. Inside the aquarium, the dim blue glow seemed deeper, more haunting. The sound of water was everywhere, even outside the tanks. Jamie arrived early for his shift, the hem of his jeans soaked and his shoes squeaking against the floor. He didn't mind. The place felt different in weather like this, closer, more alive. And now, with each new shift, something inside him buzzed quietly, a low thrum just beneath the surface. Victor was already inside, hunched over a clipboard near the touch tank. He looked up briefly when Jamie passed, gave a faint nod, then returned to his work. The usual quiet tension hovered between them, but had grown more comfortable, like a room neither wanted to leave. By the time midnight approached, the rain had grown so loud it muffled the machines. Jamie was checking the temperature logs when he noticed a blinking red light on the hallway control panel. Small, but pulsing steadily. It was coming from the deep ocean tunnel. He called to Victor without thinking, instinct guiding him. They moved together down the corridor, the sound of their boots echoing along the tiled floor, past the glowing tanks and empty observation platforms. Inside the tunnel, things felt wrong. The lighting flickered slightly overhead, and condensation had begun to form along the edges of the viewing glass. A slow drip echoed from the ceiling where a seal had likely slipped under pressure. The filtration system was still running, but the air felt heavier than it should. Victor moved forward, assessing the situation with a calm urgency. He motioned to Jamie to grab towels and a toolkit from a storage room. Jamie returned quickly, and together they worked in the low light, voices low and measured, tools clicking quietly as they secured the leak point and recalibrated the internal system. The water outside the tunnel swirled slowly, undisturbed by the small human panic on the other side of the glass. Creatures drifted by, indifferent. Sharks passed overhead like ghosts. Jamie stood, wiping his hands on his pants. His heart beat too fast, not from fear, but from the closeness of it all. From Victor's calm, the way he spoke only when necessary, the steadiness of his hands even as the rain thundered above them. They finished the patch, and Victor tested the integrity with a quick tap along the glass, satisfied but focused. They stood side by side again, breathing heavily in the sudden silence. The flickering stopped. The lights steadied. For a moment, neither of them moved. Jamie turned to Victor and found him watching the tank. Not the repair, not the tools, but the movement beyond. His expression was distant, contemplative. Blue light painted his features, softening the usually sharp angles of his face. Jamie's eyes drifted to his hand, then slowly up his arm to his shoulder. The sleeve of his shirt was damp from where the leak had sprayed him, and a strand of hair clung to his temple. There was something fragile in the way he stood, strong but tired, collected but not untouched. Jamie didn't think. He reached out, just barely, and let his fingers rest lightly against Victor's forearm. A small, simple touch. Victor didn't flinch. He turned his head slowly, his gaze finding Jamie's. The world shrank around them. No tanks, no lights, no water. Just that space. That breath. The look they exchanged held no demand. No rush. It was a question wrapped in silence. Jamie let his hand fall away. The contact brief, but electric. His chest was tight, but not from nerves. From release. From the knowledge that he didn't have to explain himself. Victor didn't speak, but his eyes stayed on Jamie a moment longer than they needed to. There was no smile, just something deeper. Recognition, maybe, or permission. They gathered the tools without a word and returned to the control room. The hallway was quiet again, the blinking light gone. For the rest of the shift, they moved through their tasks in near silence. But it was no longer avoidance. It was something else. An intimacy built from what wasn't said, from what lingered in glances and the memory of a hand resting gently where no words could reach. When the shift ended, the rain had slowed to a steady whisper. Jamie stepped outside first, drawing a long breath of damp air. The streetlights cast soft reflections on the pavement, and the scent of salt and earth hung thick in the air. Victor followed, locking the door behind them. They stood there, side by side again, the city asleep around them. Jamie looked at him, not for answers, but for a truth he already knew. Victor met his gaze, quiet as ever. Neither of them moved. They didn't need to. Something had changed, and there was no going back. The following week moved with unusual stillness. The rain stopped. The skies cleared. And yet, inside Jamie, a quiet storm lingered. Nothing in his day-to-day had changed. He showed up to his shifts, completed his tasks, walked the echoing halls of the aquarium. But something deeper had shifted, like the tide after a full moon. Victor hadn't spoken of what happened in the tunnel. There had been no follow-up, no differences, but there didn't need to be. The way he looked at Jamie, calmer, steadier, with just the hint of vulnerability behind his usual restraint, said more than words could offer. Jamie carried that silence with him like a fragile artifact, not because it hurt, but because it mattered, because the space between them had become something sacred. The aquarium was scheduled to close for maintenance that weekend, 2 full days without guests, allowing for deep cleaning, structural checks, and internal recalibrations. Jamie and Victor were both listed for the overnight shift before the shutdown. Jamie arrived early again, more out of instinct than planning. The halls were already dim, the tanks lit like distant planets in a dark sky. The sound of circulating water filled every room like a second heartbeat. He found comfort in the repetition, the familiar pathways, the cool air, the glow of glass. He wandered through the exhibits slowly, lingering by the stingrays, then the jellyfish. He noticed small things now, the patterns of movement, the way the light curved along the walls. But his thoughts were elsewhere. Victor found him near the kelp forest tunnel. He didn't approach loudly. He never did. Jamie turned as he arrived, and they exchanged a quiet glance. No words, just acknowledgement. It was enough. They worked in quiet harmony for the next hour, inspecting panel seams, organizing backup filters, resetting timers. The rhythm was comfortable, the silence filled not with distance, but with understanding. Around midnight, Jamie paused in the central exhibit room, where the large cylindrical tank reached from floor to ceiling, filled with slow-swimming groupers and darting schools of silverfish. He leaned against the railing, letting his thoughts drift with the current behind the glass. Victor joined him a few moments later, standing a few feet away. For a while, neither moved. The water swirled upward in lazy spirals, the overhead lights casting rings of color that shimmered across the floor. Jamie spoke first, his voice low, barely cutting through the ambient hum. "I've never felt like I belonged somewhere until this place." Victor didn't respond immediately. When he did, it was gentle, almost a murmur. "Neither did I. Not really." Jamie looked at him, not in search of validation, but connection. There was something in Victor's presence that grounded him, something he wanted to lean into, even if he didn't fully understand why. The silence stretched, but it wasn't heavy. Jamie turned slightly, facing him fully. "What happens when this ends?" he asked. Victor's brow furrowed gently. He didn't look away. "You mean the shift?" he asked softly. "No," Jamie said. "This." It hung in the air, not as a demand, but as a truth. A line drawn gently, not with a blade, but with a fingertip. Victor took a slow breath. His shoulders rose and fell with it. He stepped a little closer, not much, but enough to feel real. I don't know, he admitted, but I know what I want it to be. Jamie's chest tightened, not with fear, but with clarity. He didn't reach for Victor. He didn't need to. The space between them had already begun to close, breath by breath, look by look. What existed wasn't built on impulse or heat, but on something slower. Tua. I'm not asking for a promise, Jamie said. Just don't walk away. Victor's eyes softened. For once, the walls around him seemed almost gone. I won't, he said. They stood in the quiet together, surrounded by glass and movement and light. Later, when their shift ended, they walked out side by side into the pre-dawn stillness. The sky above the city was pale blue, not yet morning, but no longer night. The air smelled of salt and whetstone. At Jamie's car, they paused. Victor looked at him, not with hesitation, but with calm. Whatever this was between them, it didn't need a name. It didn't need a label. It just was. And for now, that was enough. Jamie smiled, a small, honest smile that reached his eyes. Victor didn't smile back, but his expression said everything. They parted without touching, but something had begun, something real.